All right, guys. So the party told you to reject the evidence of your eyes and ears. It was their final, most essential command. That obviously is a quotation, a very popular quotation from George Orwell's dystopian novel, 1984. It was a fictional warning of the society to come, a prediction that a global elite would control a society with a centralized economy, where there would be thought police, criminalized speech, a ministry of truth, which would wipe away history and rule society with an ever-present. Well, today, that society, that fictional society, has become a reality. We have the Ministry of Truth in the form of mainstream journalists. They lie to protect the global elite, fact checkers and smears of any opponents to their official version of past and present. You know, I started to realize that 1984 was a reality when I quite accidentally stumbled upon the curious case of Brigitte Macron. Yes, the First Lady of France, as presented in a set of documents, a series written by a journalist named Xavier Poussard. He insisted that Brigitte Macron was actually born a man named Jean-Michel Trogneux. And I thought, that's so kooky and crazy. It's going to be super easy to debunk that. And boy, was I in for a surprise, realizing that he had done years of research and presented a solid case that Brigitte Macron was in fact born a man. So now what's happened? Well, of course, they didn't accept that. The mainstream press called everybody crazy and a conspiracy theorist and unhinged. We've heard all of their words, their pedophile psychology, as I like to call it, thanks to Sigmund Freud being the father of that sort of gaslighting. Now I'm going to show you a photo, and I want to remind you not to believe your own eyes. Here's a photo of Brigitte Macron. She's vacationing with her husband on a boat. And here it is closer. And it does seem that there might be something that doesn't belong. But again, do not believe your own eyes. Ladies and gentlemen, you are in for a treat today because I have been in communication with the journalist that broke this massive story. In a fair world, and we don't live in one, he would have won a Pulitzer. Instead, what is happening is that he is all but avoiding going back to France, not because he's being prosecuted for breaking the story, but because now they are trying to boggle him down legally by digging up an old story he wrote 3 years ago and accusing him of, you're not going to believe it, guys, anti-Semitism. Breaking the rules of anti-Semitism, as what he's actually doing is potentially exposing a pedophile ring that doesn't just expand across France, but as we are starting to realize as we do more research, it does appear to be a global elite ring. So we're going to speak to him, going to remind you that there still has not been a single photo presented to the public that is not easily debunked of Brigitte Macron growing up. His theory? Well, Jean-Michel Trogneux lived as a man until 1980, when he assumed the identity of his little sister, Brigitte. And ever since then, the media will not present any photos or just simply have Jean-Michel Trogneux walk out with his sister if he does, in fact, exist. And by the way, he does exist. It's just that he's now living as Brigitte Macron. Ladies and gentlemen, that is what we have coming up, an incredible exclusive interview with Xavier Poussard. Don't go away. All right, guys, I promised you a treat. I am so excited to have Xavier Poussard here. And as I mentioned, there have been so many lies in the mainstream media just trying to distract people from looking into this strange case of Brigitte Macron, leading people to believe that the young woman is being sued because she lied about Brigitte being a man, when in fact that young woman did not publish the initial set of articles. It was published in Fait Cet Documents, and the writer who we're speaking with today, his name is Xavier Poussard. Xavier, thank you so much for joining me. I'll jump in right away with a question. How did you begin this investigation?
Merci, Candace, pour l'invitation.
Thank you for the invitation, Candace. First off, this investigation is just one. We're a confidential newsletter which is published in print. Essentially, our publication deals with news pertaining to power networks, and we're also an archive center. In 2012, we opened a file pertaining to Brigitte Macron because the history surrounding her seemed very strange. At that time, Emmanuel Macron was appointed principal advisor to the socialist president François Hollande.
Sorry, could you say there appeared to be some documentation?
Et en accumulant de la documentation, nous nous sommes...
Yes, as we accumulated documents and evidence, we saw that it didn't match the story of Brigitte Macron. At the time, there was an intense campaign by the media to promote Emmanuel Macron as a candidate against the right wing, and they were really promoting the character of Brigitte Macron as well. However, every time her story was told, inconsistencies kept emerging. The narrative in 2019 was that they had an age difference of 20 years and that she was Emmanuel Macron's French professor, yet a very gorgeous and beautiful woman, and that all the students were in love with her. This initial narrative that there is an age difference of 19 years, instead of incurring blame, the media stated Emmanuel Macron was almost of legal age. He was presented as this virile, promising, aspiring young man who was charming and seductive to this beautiful woman, and who had the right stuff to be head of state.
Even with just that narrative, the age difference, it's very strange to think that the media would not have further questions, and yet they sort of presented this couple as a love story, a modern love story of a woman who left her family because she fell so in love with a student. But then you were able to determine that even the ages that they were presenting to the public were not correct of when they fell in love. Is that right?
A senior journalist in French public television wrote a book proposing and confronting all the narratives about how they met. This included information that Brigitte Macron had been his theater professor, not his French professor, and that he was in fact 14 and she 39 when they initially met. So in essence, it was a case of an adult involved with a minor. After having gathered all published photos of Brigitte Macron, we concluded that there was no clear continuum of her physical appearance throughout the years. The press touted many members of the Trogneau family, Brigitte's family, to the French electorate, comparing them to the Kennedys, and not just a family of chocolate makers from Amiens, north of Paris. All the biographies published emphasized the members of the family, for the simple fact that Macron is a technocrat. So to balance this, the media was selling an image of a family which was really grounded in the country, grounded in real France.
Mais le problème,
even with all this, we discovered that there was one brother, Jean-Michel Trogneau, who did not appear in any of the biographies. I asked all my contacts, do you have anything on Brigitte? And in particular, one of my contacts, who is a civil servant, looked at me with a grin and said, "He's a man." Well, if this is true, then who is this man? So the official biographies should be rewritten. One of my contacts told me about Natasha Ray, a journalist who was able to explain and establish that Brigitte is a man. I contacted this Natasha Ray, and it turned out she was not a journalist, just a concerned citizen who, like me and like others, had asked questions about Brigitte Macron and who had compiled evidence, and had started from the hypothesis that it was a man. While looking at the material, she had found in the family photo a little boy who was this hidden brother whom I had already identified but hadn't yet matched a face to, and who was indeed Jean-Michel Trogneau. So we agreed that I would publish her findings in this investigation.
Wow. And just so my audience is clear, Natasha Ray is the one that the media is trying to present as the person who published the document. She is the one that is currently being sued. We're going to discuss the actual reason she's being sued for, but Xavier Poussard is not being sued for libel in France whatsoever. So you start to gather these documents and you start to realize the pictures coming together. And I just want to say, for me, one of the things that I encourage my audience to do is believe their eyes. And as soon as I saw that there were really only 2 photos that were ever presented as a young Brigitte Macron, the first photo being the one that we're going to show right now, it was very obvious to me that Brigitte looked like the person on the left in the family photo. And this is the first photo that we see. We're told that Brigitte is the person that's sitting on her mother's lap, but it's very clear to me that Brigitte looks exactly like the person on the left. And that was before I read the Jean-Michel Trogneau thesis. And then they presented this second photo, which is very clearly a recolorized photo, which looks exactly like Brigitte's daughter, who he fathered, Typhon. And I just thought it was amazing that they were trying to pass off these fake photos, which is bizarre. So the legend, as you were just explaining, is that, oh, they fell in love when they were in school. It was lovely. Things went on. Brigitte's from a small town in Amiens. Her family were in the chocolate industry. You read this biography, you start realizing none of this is real. What did you do? What did your paper, rather, that you presented to the public discover or not discover about Jean-Michel Trogneau? Who is Jean-Michel Trogneau?
Alors d'abord sur la photo de Tiphaine, sur la photo présentée comme la communiante.
First, on the photo of Tiphaine as the communicant, we cross-referenced this photo. Now, this photo is indeed Brigitte Trogneau, and this is where it becomes interesting. It is a fact that Jean-Michel Trogneau is an individual who calls himself Brigitte and has assumed the identity of his younger sister, Brigitte Trogneau. I'll summarize my conclusions from this as follows. The girl in white, the communicant, is Brigitte Trogneau. The central problem is that Brigitte, this so-called Brigitte, is not Brigitte Trogneau. It's her brother, Jean-Michel Trogneau. As soon as we started working with Natasha, she was immediately taken into custody and detained in a police station for this investigation. At the time, we did not have enough evidence, and so we relayed her hypothesis, which was partially false since we didn't have all the evidence. After the publication of these documents, all the proceedings in the trial against Natasha Ray target a video that she made herself on the channel of a clairvoyant. And actually, all the prosecutions are based on inaccuracies which are due to the fact that Natasha Ray is not a journalist and not well versed in media rules and regulations. So after the first phase in 2021, from 2022 up until 2024, we continued our investigation and we were able to collect 5 exclusive photos of Jean-Michel Trogneau from the past, all in coherence, proving that Brigitte Macron is Jean-Michel Trogneau, and we were able to recover and compile 4 exclusive photos of Brigitte Trogneau. Of course, these are not of the public-facing Brigitte Macron.
Donc, pour résumer,
from these, the age difference is actually greater. Initially, he was 17 years old and met someone who was 36, then 14 and 39 respectively. But it is in fact a 14-year-old boy who initially met someone aged 47.
Wow.
This case is clearly about the abuse of a minor, as well as impersonation or identity theft. I'm not looking at this from a moral perspective, but rather from a legal one. In my newspaper, our methodology is a time-tested and solid one. We accumulate evidence and cross-reference it, so I assert to the public that Brigitte Macron is a man named Jean-Michel Trogneau who was born on February 11th, 1945.
Sorry, give me that date again. 11th of February, 1945. Of February, 1945. And I just want to clarify. So you are saying that the legend, which was sold to the public, that a 17-year-old boy or young man fell in love with his 34 or 36-year-old teacher is fictitious. And the truth is that Emmanuel Macron was only 14 years old, and Brigitte Macron was how old? Are you saying 47?
47. Si, 47.
So
And
she was 47 years old when they met. So in this case, it was roughly 6 years before Brigitte met Emmanuel Macron when he was 14 that she, Jean-Michel Trogneau, in reality, started to live with her sister's identity.
6 years before he used a fake identity. Wow, explosive. So one of the things that I found very interesting was this story to me is such a huge story that when I actually read through your documents and saw all of the proof, it's undeniable that Brigitte Macron was born a man. And yet when you presented it to the public, and similarly when I presented it to the public, I would think the media would jump on this and begin their own investigations, but instead the media attacked it as a lie and as a conspiracy theory. How were you treated when you published the documents? I mean, and by the way, I just want to say, unbelievable that the state detained Natasha Ray before you had even published it. But once you did publish it, what happened in France?
alors, la réaction a été
The reaction was immediate. First, Natasha was detained for a day on the presumption of a misdemeanor, and it was probably because my cell phone was tapped. My webmaster was also arrested in France, but I was not, as I was careful not to be in France at the time. After the publication of the first part of the investigation in 2021, all of our companies underwent a tax audit, the usual harassment procedure. There was a tax control on my companies, and once this case was published by Natasha and her psychic, all my bank accounts, personal and professional, were closed without explanation.
Okay, so just to get that clear, so I want to make sure I get this right. So Natasha Ray was then immediately detained for a day, and then they launched a tax investigation on who?
All my bank accounts, professional and private, were closed.
Wow.
And there was a strange ambiance in this case, a French ambiance in this case. For example, a journalist in Libéral of Lopes, which is a weekly publication of the Groupe Le Monde, it's like the New York Times. It's a liberal left woman who said, okay, this is fake news. And first of all the pieces she discovered arrived at the same conclusion we had.
Mm-hmm.
And then she was followed by the Secret Service in a hostel where she had a meeting with Natasha. So it was a very strange thing. It's like in your United States with big corporations. In Paris, there's an expression that says, Brigitte is untouchable. And in fact, one humorist who was on national TV in France was fired for saying Brigitte was abusing and oppressing a student because Brigitte and the government just have so much power. And a lot of journalists are afraid to cover this case, and due to the nature of the case, it involving a minor and abuse, many people aren't comfortable pursuing it. There are multiple theories around Macron. You could say it's a pedophile network with a lot of people in France involved in these crimes. For example, the French Department of Justice is run by Eric Dupont-Moretti, who is a lawyer famous for the Procès du Trois case, where 12 children were victims of sex crimes, but he got all the accused abusers off and they are now free.
Mm-hmm.
Another example was an incest case where he obtained plea deals for the defendants and really advocated for organized crime groups and these pedophile networks. And there's a lot of people like this around Macron. For example, Jack Long, who is the chair of the Arab World Institute, was involved in the Epstein case. You must remember that when Epstein was arrested in New York, he was invited to France to attend the 30th anniversary of the Louvre Pyramid by Long, with all the French establishment in attendance. You must also recall that Ghislaine Maxwell is originally from France, so is Jean-Luc Brunel. So there is an aura of pedophilia surrounding those in power in France under Macron and under Brigitte Macron, and all the journalists know, but they don't say anything because they're afraid to lose their jobs.
Yes. And it's incredible that there is this exact same thing happening in America right now. I mean, they fully attacked me for exposing a similar pedophile network of power that is happening here in America. And I know that I messaged you and I was explaining this to you, that it is so strange that even when you say, hey, it's very weird that they keep protecting pedophiles, you start to realize that the media, which we refer to as the establishment media, you refer to it as corporate media, are quite literally employed to protect pedophiles in power and to ruin the lives of any independent journalists who risk everything to tell the public. I want to ask you, Xavier, because there was something very interesting in your article pertaining to Emmanuel Macron. Now, my theory is that it is very plausible that they are putting pedophiles and their victims into positions of power so that they can control them all across the world. I believe that they are putting pedophiles in power. And I was very compelled by your investigation into Emmanuel Macron's childhood. Now, the legend holds that he was raised by his grandmother and didn't have a very close relationship with his biological parents. Am I correct in stating that his grandmother worked at a trans clinic at some point, or Emmanuel Macron's family worked at a trans clinic? Can you elaborate on that?
First of all, we don't know much about Macron. He grew up with his grandmother, and the house they lived in is now closed. It's very strange. There's no photos that exist of Macron with his parents before the age of 25. What we discovered is that a woman named Françoise Noguès, who was presented as the mother of Emmanuel Macron, was in charge of a medical program for transgender people in France. This information was never in the newspapers, and there are testimonies that we found where transgender people are thanking Françoise Noguès for this program. And the strange point here is, when we researched the life of Jean-Michel Trogneau with Brigitte, we found that they're connected to Emmanuel Macron. All of these elements are very strange, and we must remember that Macron, before he was president, he was a banker at Rothschilds & Co., but he doesn't have the qualifications to be a banker.
Yeah.
A colleague of his said that it is peculiar that he became the youngest associate. In the report, we see that Brigitte Macron is very close with David de Rothschild, like family. He is the godfather of Macron. And you have to remember that David de Rothschild is the president of the World Jewish Congress. So it's for this reason that whenever anyone brings up Brigitte Macron and pedophilia, they are accused of anti-Semitism. For example, you, Candace, are accused of this. Zoe Sagon, who is a Twitter account who helped me publish this case, was banned after pressure from Jewish organizations. And during a radio show, I gave a list to the owner of a French media outlet, and France called Italy to bring accusations of anti-Semitism. 3 hours ago, a list appeared in a left-leaning paper called Le Monde Diplomatique, and it's an official list that says, Rupert Murdoch, Fox News, you are an anti-Semite. It makes no sense. The question is, why is everyone who pursues this case of Macron being labeled as an anti-Semite? The answer is very simple. It is because David de Rothschild is the godfather of Macron and the president of the World Jewish Congress. And if you look at the Epstein case, there is a financial structure to support their operation. It's a mega group created by Leslie Wexner and Edgar Bronfman, who was the chairman of the World Jewish Congress at the time. And the documents, the Austrian passport that the FBI found at Epstein's house, were a gift from Ronald Lauder, who helped Epstein in his case, and later became the president of the World Jewish Congress. You can see that it was this organization that called the Epstein case a controlled accident, and which Putin called a collective accident with blackmail on people who are really puppets, and do what they're told because they don't want their private lives shown to the public.
This is fascinating, and it's fascinating because the fact that you are now being accused of anti-Semitism for a piece that you wrote 3 years ago, And in reality, what you're trying to do today is to expose a pedophile ring, and to know that that is exactly what is happening to me only reaffirms my belief that what we have right now is a pedophile ring that has assumed a ton of power in the world by pretending that any person that notices this pedophile ring is an anti-Semite. My theory is that these people are not Jewish. I think that they have, they publicly present themselves as being Jewish, but in reality, they worship and follow an entirely different faith, and it's satanic. That is why I have encouraged my listeners to learn who Jacob Frank was, to learn what Frankism was, because that never went away and it came to America. And when these pedophiles get caught, they say, "Oh, I'm Jewish. This is blood libel. This is blood libel." And it's so important for Jewish people to wake up and to understand that this is not blood libel. This is not anti-Semitism. These are demonic, monstrous people that are using Judaism to hide what their actions are. And it just can't be the case that every person that discovers pedophilia is then accused of anti-Semitism by the very powerful media organ. So I want to ask you about Téphane now, the daughter of Brigitte Macron, because Téphane seems to be the only person in Brigitte's family that will lie for Brigitte. It's very public, Téphane. What is the actual relationship between Téphane and Brigitte? Did Brigitte father Téphane? Why is Téphane so involved in trying to convince the public that Brigitte is a woman, when it's so obvious that Brigitte was born a man?
First, to finish on this point, you are Catholic, Candace, and you have to remember what is written in the Book of Revelations. They say Jewish, but they're not really Jewish. They are a satanic synagogue. So this text is important. Tiffany Osier is the niece of Brigitte. She's the daughter of Brigitte Trogneux, and legally she is the niece of Jean-Michel Trogneux. They didn't change the story. It's just misdirection. When I studied the Epstein case, they used a lot of misdirection, like when you watch something by David Copperfield. It seems to be very complex, but at the end, it's a very simple thing. It was just a switch in identities. In the mid-80s, a brother takes the identity of his sister. That's it. Then we observed something strange about Tiffany Osier. She was a lawyer in the north of France, and when we pursued this case, she suddenly wrote a book and became a writer and increased her social status. And her sister, who was a renowned cardiologist in Paris, suddenly became a contemporary artist in the style of Jeff Koons. She has associated her art with Jack Lang, who is friends with Macron and was friends with Epstein. It's the same Jack Lang we mentioned earlier was connected to these famous pedophilia cases in France. Her social status is also increasing.
Yes, very strange. And so your belief is that the sister, the real Brigitte, which we see again in that family photo, sitting on the lap, which looks nothing like Jean-Michel Trogneux and nothing like Brigitte Macron, do you believe that Brigitte Osier is still alive?
This is why I think this case is a difficult one, because it's about a family secret. You have the Trogneux family, who is very important in the town of Amiens, and then there's the Osier family, who are very important in the French intelligence community. I called a lot of people in the families about this, and nobody wants to comment on it. No journalist wants to write a book uncovering this secret or investigating these families. It's very strange.
There also seems to be an element here, and of course in my research of learning about what the Frankist satanic cult believed in, was incest, and a word known as apostasy. Well, apostasy meaning that you convert into other religions falsely, so you pretend to be Muslim, you pretend to be Christian, you pretend to be Jewish. But in reality, what you are is you worship Satan, and they believe in incest. So Jacob Frank had sex with his daughter. I don't know if you know this, but the Frankists first went down into France. And this Junius Frey was actually Jacob Frank's nephew. I don't know if you knew that. So this religion, Marie Antoinette as well, they were actually Frankists, and they believed in incest and pedophilia. And when I see that picture you brought up earlier, Jean-Jacques, when I look at that picture of him, who you believe was fathered by Jean-Michel Trogneau, he looks like Emmanuel Macron. Jean-Jacques has a facial similarity to Emmanuel Macron. They look like relatives. Do you think that part of the family secret could be incest? Obviously, we're just, theorizing here.
To continue on this point and the background of incest surrounding this case, Brigitte was very close with a man named Olivier Duhamel. He's the president of Le Cercle, a secret social club in France that's important to the techno structure. The list of members is of course secret, and the president of Le Cercle was involved in an incest scandal and was very close to Brigitte and Macron, a great supporter of them. Recall what we said about the Rothschilds. In the Museum of Judaism in Paris, the cousin of David de Rothschild, whose name is Natalia Reims, said, "In our family, we say nice is vice, but incest is best, because it stays in the family."
Et puis comme on faisait très souvent dans ces familles-là, vice is nice, but incest is best, because it stays in the family.
And that's strange. It's an investigation of the morality of the people in France. But remember the film Back to the Future. What happens? He goes to the past and almost seduces his mother. It is a popularized and humorized vice. But it's just another sign of Western decadence.
Mm-hmm. This is very scary stuff, and it seems that there is sort of an awakening happening where people are starting to recognize that something more sinister is going on. And of course, a recent example of that was just the Olympics. It does seem that they're trying to almost now indoctrinate the entire world into their satanic faith. And it, like I said, it is my belief that this is a synagogue of Satan. Like you mentioned, it is biblical. It mentions this, people who are pretending to be Jews, but are in fact people that worship Satan. And it seems like a very small, incredibly powerful group of elites. And I can trace this through to Australia, to Switzerland, to France, to America, to Canada. And it explains why it is the circumstance that all of these world leaders that we have, even President Zelensky, all seem to be homosexual. Obviously, their relationships are not real. Emmanuel Macron had, when he got elected, a young man who came out and said that he had slept with Emmanuel Macron. And he said that he was a psychopath, that Emmanuel Macron was a psychopath. Well, in my research, I learned that psychologists were interested in how to create a psychopath. And one thing that they discovered was that if you rape a child, the chances are that they will have psychopathic tendencies when they're older, that they will develop this neurosis and that they will become psychopathic. And this is one of the elements that the French public realized about Emmanuel Macron, that he seemed to be almost psychopathic and angry when COVID happened. Like Emmanuel Macron liked to inflict pain on the public.
I think that the group which runs the West have to promote psychopathic goals because once they go away, there is only world war to maintain power. So they have to promote these dangerous psychopathic personalities and figures. And all the media narratives are the inverse. I don't mean that they're fake or false, but they are the opposite. In France, people are normal. You are Catholic, you have a family, but there are lunatics in the media. For example, a magazine with the cover featuring Melania Trump doesn't appear, and she's just a normal woman. But Brigitte has tons of covers. Michelle Obama, tons of covers. But never any for Melania Trump.
Well, Xavier, you and I have been in communication, and I know that we're coming down, and I want to continue this conversation. And I do want to actually translate your work into English so that people can find it in America and read it. Because if we had a world that was not being run by satanic pedophiles, you would have won a Pulitzer. You would be not having to run away for anti-Semitism pertaining to a piece 3 years ago, but you would have been awarded a Pulitzer for this incredible investigation that you've brought to the public sphere. So where can my audience follow your work?
Here at Faits et Documents, we are translating our work into an English book for the American public because there is so much information that only French speakers have, as well as updating the case on our website. Stay tuned on September 12th because we have a process for this investigation and flipping it around on the media.
Amazing. Well, Xavier, thank you so much for joining us today. I will definitely point my everyone that's listening to this. It's an incredible story, and the cover-up is even more incredible. And we are just so blessed that we have independent media people who are really willing to risk their lives and their freedom to get out the truth to the public. So don't just get invested in this case. Share it with people. We need everyone in the world to realize that what we have going on is something that is so sinister. It is beyond comprehension, and yet it is real. Xavier, thank you so much for joining us.